traveled throughout the state to all the psychiatric centers throughout the state, which was at the time called state hospitals. We always knew Pilgrim was the largest. Pilgrim opened up in 31, took its first patients in 1932. The director of Kings Park, Tiffany, was taken out of Kings Park, sent here to set this place up to open it. I actually found the books of all the correspondence that went between the state of New York and all the companies involved in getting this place set up ready to operate. And it was very interesting. And what I didn't know at the time is when they sent the normal, in the 30s, when they sent the normal letter, they did it in pencil. Because all they had were fountain pens. So sometimes the letter will be written with pencil, but it'll be signed in ink. Very few of the letters are actually all ink. The only time you'll see all ink is if it's an official document. Even when the newspaper would write letters here or anything like that, it's always done in pencil. When this place first opened, it was just these 4 sections, this one, and those 2 over there. The 80s, this big building, which doesn't belong there, that was made after the model was made. This building would actually be over there. 25 was built before the 80s was built. But when it first opened, it was just these 4 sections. And then, of course, the building you're in, all the small buildings, these here, were all staff housing. And the houses over there that were torn down about 2 years ago were for the doctors. And the bigger building over there was for professional staff. And everything in this facility, I've been underground many a time. All the tunnels, the pedestrian tunnels are not connected throughout the facility. Those tunnels are only held in certain areas, like these 4 sections have pedestrian tunnels. Because at Pilgrim, for some reason, they made the dining rooms separate from where the patients lived. Where at Kings Park, most of the dining rooms are in the buildings. So this is where the food was cooked and served. So if the weather was bad, the clients would go through the tunnels into this building. But underground there, it's not just a hallway. There's all rooms under there. It's big. Matter of fact, there's writing on the wall so you don't get lost. And if you see those round things, those octagon-shaped things on the ground all over the place with the windows, those are to let light into the tunnels. Now the steam tunnels start at the power plants, of course. And all the wiring, plumbing, everything goes through those tunnels. Those tunnels are narrow. They're only about from that wall to about here and about that high. They go everywhere. Anywhere throughout this facility, including under Savicos, over to where those doctors' cottages were, the tunnels actually went into those cottages. And then they went over even further over into Suffolk Community College. The model was built because when this facility was being built, it was the largest brick project in New York. That's why the model was made. The model was always kept in Building 18, which is administration over here. And then when Peggy O'Neill became director, she had it removed, and it was put in the basement of the Assembly Hall. Many years later, when I came over to Pilgrim, I found a picture, this one over here. I found this photograph in the file cabinet at Kings Park, and it has a picture of the model in it. This is before Pilgrim was even built, and, well, before it was finished. And so when I came here, I started looking for this model. The director, Alan Weinstock, said it was fine, so I eventually found the model, like I said, in the basement of that building. It was covered with paint cans. This originally had a glass case over, which was totally smashed. So I took the model breaks into 4 sections. We took it apart, and I made it part of I work in the rehab department, so we made restoring the model part of the rehab program. So the clients got paid a salary, and they helped do the best we can. There's all a little piece of paper on all these blocks of wood. All of it was off. It was all laying all over the place. You got to pick them up off the floor and try to figure out where they went. I didn't finish it completely because I was a little scared I would destroy it because it's very fragile. But after I got the model halfway decent, and we were in that building over there at the time, the old laundry down by the power plant. When we were in that building, I had it laying in there for a few years. And then I was talking to the director back and forth, and I had collected other things since I found this, like looking around for other stuff. And I accumulated a decent amount of things, so the director told me I could build a museum up here. And so while I collected more stuff, they renovated this half of the building so I could make the museum. And that's how it all started. And then I went to the other facilities, Central Islip, Kings Park, everywhere, looking for whatever I could find. And what they do in the state is, when they close the facility, they change all the locks and all the doors. And one key opens everything, even the gates, everything. So I had one key that would open everything in all the facilities, which made it nice and easy. So I did that, They told me if I lose the key, I'll lose my job, but I didn't. So it worked out okay. One of the last things I got was the post office. That was in 18. And the reason that was one of the last things I got is because I couldn't take it because it belonged to the federal government. So I had to wait till they departed completely before I could take it. Then when they left, I did take it, but by the time I got to it, all the brass, there was brass all over that. It was all taken off already. Any questions about anything?
Yeah. What's that tower by right?
That's a water tower, but it's empty.
Is it still there?
This is still there, and the developer who owns the property, a Heartland Corporation, cannot tear it down
Okay.
because it's an historical site. He can move it. So if he did want to move it, he can do that as long as he does not destroy it. But from what I hear, what he told me was he was going to build around it. But he hasn't done anything at this point. And I don't think he's going to. Yes?
Where is the Edgewood building?
The Edgewood building was not on the grounds. It was further down the block.
Right.
Comac Road.
Right.
Right.
Matter of fact, Comac Road was actually moved. Comac Road was, they wanted Edgewood to be in the same property area as Pilgrim. So they moved Comac Road further west. And old Comac Road became the road to get between the two hospitals. And if you look on that old north map up there, you can see all of Edgewood and the two roads. And that road is still there. It's still in pretty good shape. And there's also, I noticed, during World War II, the military used the 80s building and Edgewood for soldiers that became mentally ill. And what they did was, if they were showing signs of being mentally ill or they said they were mentally ill, they were taken to these two buildings. They were given sodium pentothal and hypnotized, and the reason that was done to see if they were lying and telling the truth. If they were lying, they were sent right back to the front line. Otherwise, they stayed there for approximately a year. And they had like a 90% success rate, but I think because once he took them out of danger, they were okay. Where at the same time, in this facility, we were discharging very few people. But even years ago, even when I worked on the wards as a ward charge in the late 70s, when I first started working for the state, it wasn't like you see in the movies where we want to keep everybody in the hospital, okay? All we did was try to discharge people. And back then, if a patient demanded he wanted out and he wasn't a danger to themselves or others, we could just open the door and let him go. And the doc would have to agree to it, and a lot of times he would. And when we did do that, 90% of the time the patient would leave. And then in the 80s, when Mario Cuomo was going to deinstitutionalize, late 80s, the biggest problem we had with shrinking was getting the clients to agree to go. They felt this was their home, all right? What you see in movies where they're all locked in rooms and all these other things, those were the private facilities. The state facilities were cutting edge. We had much more money. So all the new treatments were developed in the state facilities. The private facilities back then were the ones that everybody was just locked up and no one went out. I found even like weird things like we used to have like whirlpool systems before they even existed. Like we called them continuous flow bathrooms. That was used to calm people down. We also have, like if you ever saw the old Lucy shows when they put the person in a box and just the head sticking out, we even had them in all the buildings in the basements. We did have some barbaric things that actually worked. This bathtub is cast iron with a ton. Back in the 20s, teens, early on, there was no medication, they had nothing, not even sodium pentothal, nothing. So if somebody was extremely agitated and they were psychotic, they'd be pretty much out of control, okay? And they had nothing to calm the person down with. So a lot of people would consider this barbaric, but what they did at this point was they'd fill it with ice water, put them in it, and hold them in it. And believe it or not, if you read the old records, it actually worked. They would calm down because whatever was going on in their head, it would shock it out of their systems. And they wouldn't just be calm right after they took them out of it. It would actually work for a period of time. So back then, they were thinking, somehow this is driving the illness out of the body. But it's really not. It would just make them forget whatever was bothering them, and they were fine for the time being. But they thought, oh, we got some miracle cure here that didn't work. So I'm just saying, you always got to look at everything when it was being done, just like straitjackets. When I worked admissions, we used straitjackets all the time. in admissions unit. We got people in from the street, brought in by the police most of the time, and most of the time when the police are bringing them in, they're getting them even more agitated. So now they're coming in, they got them handcuffed, shackled, they're beat up. So when they come into us, they're angry. So we get them, now we're telling them you're staying here. And they want to kill you because they're angry. And a lot of times you can't blame them. So we did use straitjackets. We didn't have a choice. What are you going to do? Let the person attack everybody around, hurt themselves, because we've had patients actually try to jump through windows, smash their head through steel bars. You had to do something. The medication was poor. Back then we were using mainly Mellaril and Thorazine, which are nothing but tranquilizers, just calm them down. The problem with those particular tranquilizers was they came out in the 50s, Thorazine. Matter of fact, Thorazine was actually called lobotomy drug when it first came out, because it did pretty much the same thing as lobotomy. It just calmed people down. But it was the main drug that was being used, and Mellaril came after, which is the same thing. So everybody's on Mellaril and Thorazine. So by the time the 70s came along, they're on this for 20 years. So it's not working anymore. So the incidents started getting worse again. So we started having to use jackets even more again. So everything is, changes through time. And then when you started getting drugs like Prolixin, lithium, Haldol, they were the first drugs that actually affected the mind, that changed some of the thought habits and thinking, okay? Where you're not just calming them down, they're not just walking around like a zombie, you're actually helping them. You're actually doing something in their mind that's actually helping them. And that's when we started being able to discharge a lot more clients, and the restraints started getting less and less. Today, the medication we have are fantastic. We have no restraints at all. Now, they can brag all day long, we're restraint-free. They could not have done that 50 years ago. It's been impossible. Medication changed everything. Yes, ma'am.
What's the medication that you use now?
There's a ton of them. What do you were on the wards recently, Joe?
It's as a stat for psychotic agitation. It's mostly Haldol 5 Ativan 2.
I don't mean that. The regular medications.
It depends on the type of unit. I guess depends on what type of patient you have.
Clozapine is, I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Ativan, I've heard of.
Yeah, well, Ativan's been around a while. Clozapine, that series of drugs is very expensive, but tends to work the best.
Prolixin, there's a lot of
Well, Prolixin's an older drug also. Clozapine is a newer drug that gets used a lot, not only here, even on the outside, because it works very well. We had no, years ago, Prolixin was our miracle drug. Because Prolixin, like you saw someone that you couldn't talk to or anything, and all of a sudden you see another person there that's smart, intelligent, you can have a really good conversation with, and you're like in shock at first because you didn't realize this person was there until we got drugs like that. And those are the drugs that did the most change, but also the better the drugs, the more dangerous they were. That's the problem we were
side
having.
effect, right?
Like lithium's another one, we have to test lithium levels. I mean, like, as the drugs got better, they became more dangerous. Haldol, another one which works well on certain people, has very bad side effects, because it started dyskinesia. So a lot of people on Haldol are taking Cogentin because of the side effects of it. Thorazine, like I said, it's just a tranquilizer. The whole idea with Thorazine was, this person's agitated, give them Thorazine, they're calmer. If they're really agitated, you can give them more Thorazine, and it'll calm them down even more. Before that, they would give them sodium pentothal and knock them out, because that's all they had.
What is the medallion? What does the medallion represent? What is that?
That I do not know. I've checked everything. It's on all the
everywhere.
buildings.
Yeah.
All the buildings had those medallions on it, and no one seems to know what
What it represents.
that means.
It represents something.
Which of the buildings are they gonna rip down to put that town in here?
Okay. He was going to start at this end, simply because there was no buildings here, and there's no buildings back here. So if he ever does develop the property, this is where he's going to do it first.
Okay.
Now, all these buildings are already torn down. He tore all those down, he tore these down. Matter of fact, he's torn down almost all the buildings except for by the power plant. All those buildings are still standing. Well, the circle is ours.
Powerhouse gun?
Yeah, I'm talking about what Heartland owns.
Oh,
He's
okay.
planning
Powerhouse
on
gun?
putting.
No, that's all still there, but Heartland belongs to it.
Wasn't this a farm?
Yes, that's now Suffolk Community
I
College.
know, there's a pig farm or something too.
Yes.
Yeah.
They grew all the
I'm
crops.
planning on putting the bricks and stuff in those tunnels.
Tunnels,
Putting what?
The bricks from the building that he tore down.
in the tunnels.
And we're fighting that he don't do that because, people could use the bricks or something, but,
The problem with the bricks are, he was originally gonna sell the bricks. That was his idea. But the mortar they used when the hospital was first built, they can't get the mortar off the bricks.
that's right.
That's why he never did nothing with them. And then I took a few of the bricks to the shop, because we had a shop on the grounds in the old kitchen over here, right? And I tried to get the mortar off the bricks too, and I was able to, but it took me forever to get off one brick.
Yeah.
Where the buildings that were built later, the 80s, the bricks were falling off the building. Totally different.
When were they built, the 80s?
That was like 15 years later.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so whoever built that building, even though the design is a typical state design, the contractor, whatever mortar they used, was not as good as what was used at the
Now,
rest of
was
the
that the
facility.
jail or no?
Huh?
Was that the jail?
Afterwards, it became a jail and then back into a psychiatric center.
Okay,
Matter of fact, that key is from when it was a jail.
okay.
And when that was a jail, it was only 25% full at the max. It was never full. Mario Cuomo said if he gets elected, he would close it, he did. But there was so much controversy about it from when it was built, that it never had a full complement of patients.
Didn't they make the bricks here?
On the grounds?
Yeah.
No.
No?
What I did find interesting though, in some of the buildings, when I was taking some of the walls down on the inside, when I found in the, some of the buildings had these kind of bricks in them. Like, one of these would be like here, and around it would be regular brick like this. All of this brick was made in England. Has an English name on all the bricks. So all the internal bricks that we used in 23 were made from England. Now, also, before there was medication, Walter Friedman was here. Our med surge was right back here, in these two wings on the end here. And Walter Friedman did come here and did do lobotomies. He's got his credit for doing lobotomies, Walter Friedman. But Walter Friedman didn't actually create lobotomies. He created the frontal lobotomy, basically using an ice pick and a hammer, where you put it between the eyelid and the eyeball, push it into knock a hole in the skull and just push it in. The Europeans were experimenting with the brain way before he was. And the reason they were, a guy in a construction site that was very violent got hit in the head with a board with a nail in it, and he was nice after that. So the Europeans started experimenting with the brain. But they were trying to separate something from the back and the front of the brain, and it was very costly, very dangerous. And most of the people that needed that kind of surgery had no insurance, so they stopped. That's how Walter Friedman came along with this real quick way he did it. With the frontal lobotomy, also had a very short recovery period. They could be moving around in a couple of days at max. But the other thing, they were laid up for weeks, months at a time. When I first started working with the flight, they were talking about lobotomies and the fact that why does everybody hate them so much? And we're all looking like, well, what do you mean? It's awful, putting a hole through someone's head. And again, he had success with some people where they seemed fine afterwards, and he turned other people into, yeah, I use this word vegetable, and my supervisor gets mad at me. I've seen 3 people have lobotomies when I was very young. They were very old. One of them was like you're saying, like a zombie. He could hear me, he could, like I could ask him to move, he would move, but he couldn't talk to me, and he just walked around like that. Another one, I didn't know why he was in the hospital. He seemed totally fine. So basically, they were experimenting with the brain, but they really didn't know what they were doing. Every so often he'd get lucky, and when he was being criticized, he wasn't being criticized for giving a lobotomy. He was criticized because they felt it should have been a surgical procedure, not just go in a back room someplace and use a hammer and an ice pick. He said he got very agitated when Thorazine came out, because it put him out of business. And I think Thorazine is still used to this day. Yeah?
Still widely prescribed.
Really? Yeah, that's amazing. And yet that's such an old drug in the first.
Yeah, the voice effect.
Yeah.
I worked here a couple of years back in the 80s, and a fellow would come in bringing, I worked in administration, a fellow came in bringing records to us. And he would come in and he would say, hello, and he used to be a very scholared man, and he's not anymore. He doesn't think as well as he used to because he had a lobotomy.
Right.
But he could speak and everything else, but he wasn't as smart as he used to be.
Oh, no, not at all.
Just like that.
Like
But what do they do with those people? Once they start discharging people from here,
by the time they started discharging people, I mean, look, I saw 3 when I first started working here. By the time we closed Kings Park, we didn't have any.
I know, but from here,
I mean,
I know they had to have them there too, but
yes, but there wasn't, most lobotomies were done 1950s, you know, so, I mean, I don't know how many people are,
this was in the 80s, the middle to late 80s.
but how old was the person? It had to be, the person had to be in their 80s, I'm assuming.
He was
Because
up
anybody
there.
I saw
He was
was
up
very
there.
old.
He was up
you know?
there back then.
I mean,
But
it's an
still,
awful thing. Anybody, when we were discharging, anybody who needed additional care, like, say we had someone here and we were closing facilities and we're moving into the community, if somebody needed real severe care, they would end up in a nursing home. Yeah, I'm just saying, if the person cannot take care of themselves and they're not gonna be here, that's probably where they would end up, you know? I mean, like I said, that was an awful thing, and the weird thing is, even to this day, they don't understand all that much about how the brain works. I mean, the state used to send us to classes on this, and it's just interesting how little they know. I mean, they can talk all these big terms, but they really don't know how it works completely. Even like shock therapy, another example of shock therapy. What do you think of shock therapy? You don't like it, right?
No,
So
I
a
don't
lot of
like
people
too
don't like
much.
it?
It works.
Right. Do you know, we used it all the time when I first started working here for people who were mainly depressed, of course. And there was a lot of complaints of barbaric and all this other stuff, so we started using it less and less and less. I mean, no one came right out and said it, but you could see it, worked admissions weren't using it as much. And the medication started getting better, so we had other kinds of medication we give people instead of doing shock. But in severe cases of depression, to this day, there's nothing better. I mean, you'd be shocked at, to give you an example, someone can get so depressed, they can become catatonic. And it gets so catatonic, they end up in a wheelchair and being fed by somebody. I'm talking about someone who had a job before, college degree, now he's in a wheelchair, not walking, can't feed himself because that's how depressed he is. And it went on for, it takes time. That would take years to
Yes.
get to that point. Now, on a person like that, they tried all the medications, of course, and every combination of medication, of course, and nothing worked. Okay? That person was eventually given shock. He's out of the hospital, working again, and back with his family. So, how do you knock something that, and for some people, it's the only thing that works?
Then I guess that would work on rare
But it is
occasions.
used rare. In order
Very rare.
for us to use it here in the state, we have to show that we tried everything else first and then nothing worked, which is not quick. I mean, when you put someone on any kind of medication, it could take a month before you see any kind of results at all, if not longer. So it could take a period of time. And after all this time goes by, then we can do it. And in certain instances, say the person's family doesn't agree, because the person has to agree to take it, or we can't give it to them anyway. But if they don't agree, we can take them to court and do it. And the reality of it is, it does work. We use it less in here than they do in the community. The community, matter of fact, in the community, it's being used on people who were never even patients in a hospital. They're just people who are depressed. So it does work. I was here long enough to see when they did use it, when they slowed down using it, and watch it increase again. Because in severe conditions, it's sometimes the only thing that works. Any other questions?
Are the tunnels available for tour?
They won't let me because of hazardous. Years ago, in Kings Park, I used to be able to take people in the closed facilities through the tunnels, not from the active tunnels. But because of all the vandalism and people going in them and destroying them, now it's totally off limits. And it's a shame because it's pretty outstanding. It's like a city underground.
You know what I was working on? The possibility of using the tunnels for geothermal heating and cooling, because they're already there. You know, the convent did it, and the
Yes.
nuns did it,
Mhm.
and it saves them money in the long run.
True, but
And the tunnels are already here, that's gonna save a lot of money.
I don't know enough about that. You seem to know a lot about that.
Well, I've been looking, only recently looking into it, but I'm fascinated by it.
Mhm.
And I'd rather not see the construction demolition debris like Roberto Colombo Park go over the
Mhm.
recharge groundwood area.
Right.
I'd rather see it,
Mhm.
like all these things you're showing us, those wonderful stones,
Mhm.
that all could be sold and reused and then have very little debris.
Which would be nice.
Wouldn't that be great?
But what is your, I mean, you guys are all part of the Bremel, so what is your feelings on what Heartland wants to do?
Nobody mentions that Heartland is located in the area that's the same as the,
Yeah, it's behind that way.
yeah, I know, but it's also where the brush, the low brush is, what am I
Yes.
saying?
Pine barrens.
Yeah, so now you've got this guy that not only wants to build, say, not just, say 20 houses, he wants to build these apartments or condos or co-ops, so we're talking like an incredible sewer system, and, not just 10 families, but thousands of families,
Mhm.
all on the Pine Barrens. That's very technologically, ecologically, you gotta be careful, very careful. And somehow the state has allowed this guy to buy all this land up. Oh, and by the way, he's allowed to dispense with the cost of getting rid of his bricks and just fill in a bunch of tunnels with bricks.
Mhm.
He doesn't even have to worry about that. I was always concerned, years ago, when he was first bidding to buy that property, I wrote a ton of letters saying, how can you allow this development on top of these, the brush, the plains there? How
Oh,
can
yeah,
you do
but
that?
as we
Money
talk,
talks,
though, they
money
haven't let him do anything.
No,
I
yeah.
mean, he's been here,
Yeah.
he's been here numerous times, and he hasn't been able to do anything. As a matter of fact, from what I hear, I didn't get this from him directly, but I hear from someone else, when they approved the project at the Ronkonkoma train station,
Yes.
he was really angry, because that got approved so fast, because there's politics involved in everything.
Well, that also makes sense. It's a transportation hub, and it's not sitting on the Pine Barrens.
Right, but how about here? What would you want to see him do with this?
I don't want to see him do anything.
Well,
I mean, what would
I'd
you
rather
like
see
to
the
be seen?
state.
This is what the nuns did. First, anything that they could use, they used. Like some of the more beautiful things, they incorporated into the new design.
Right.
And like they would with the tower, And then then there's companies that buy this stuff, and like some of the woodwork is beautiful woodwork from the 30s.
Oh, in here, this
In
building
there,
was
beautiful
stunning on the
woodwork.
inside. It's all
Stunning.
done. Mhm.
All the rich estates out east, they use all that old woodwork in the best Southampton palaces out there. That all could be sold, and then what they can't use, they donate, and what they don't donate, they send to a hazardous waste site.
Yeah.
And they-
Why
so
not
much
buildings
sense.
down at all? In Europe, they don't knock buildings.
Oh, I know,
They
but
refurbish them and they have them for
no,
years
no.
and years. We knock everything down.
For years, I used to argue with him about 18. That building was beautiful.
Yeah, but
And I
the
felt it was a
apartments there.
small building.
Yeah.
Why don't you leave that up and renovate it? You can
Yeah,
turn it
right.
into
Yeah, yeah,
something.
whatever you want.
And
Yeah.
now, tear it down.
I know.
And this building had stunning interior in the center,
I'll
the
bet.
back section. That's where nursing, the library was, and everything was beautiful in there.
Was Pilgrim built on the Pine Barrens?
Well, they were corner.
At the time Pilgrim was built, they didn't call
We
it
didn't know
the
about the
Pine
Pine
Barrens, Most of the facilities, including Pilgrim, was farmland. They got the property very cheap. The idea originally was, most of the facilities are in New York City.
Bring them in the country.
Clean
Yes,
air.
because they thought it'd be
Clean
clean
air.
air, but also cost.
And
City-
also the deal between the state on prisons and hospitals.
True, but,
Okay, the people gotta know that we didn't get one prison on Long Island. We got the hospitals, and upstate got the prisons.
yeah, but upstate also got the hospitals, and New York City got the hospitals. I mean, these
The
hospitals are
hospitals
all
are
over the
very
state,
depressing.
not just on Long Island. I mean, they're all over.
But not as many.
There's quite a few
Per
upstate.
capita,
There was over 65 at one point.
Right.
There was
And we had-
72 or 73 total
but the
facilities.
original agreement was the prisons were gonna be upstate and the hospitals on Long Island.
Yeah, but it turned out upstate, well, upstate actually wanted the hospitals because it was jobs.
Yeah.
There was no work up there.
Right.
So they, matter of fact, when they were closing facilities, when they closed Kings Park and CI, we had many more patients than the hospitals upstate did, but there was no work up there.
Right.
So they closed the ones downstate instead to keep people in jobs.
Closing Middletown bankrupted.
Right, because that whole area is depressed, except for the hospital. You know, and then but they still got the one, you know,
It's on the Rockland now.
right, but that's still in that Middletown area.
I'd like to see him use as much as he can use that's already here.
Yeah.
Same thing like with Central Islip.
But he
all those
he already tore everything down except for that. Now, he told me, which I didn't, I thought it was kind of far-fetched, that he was gonna turn that area into like an artsy kind of
Yes,
thing.
yes.
You've heard that?
Well, Elsa, about 12 years ago, Elsa and I went on a tour with Jerry Walcott of the whole facility, and at that time, a lot of those buildings were still up and everything. And he had offered us a tour of one of the buildings, and the other person that we were with was like, "Oh no, you know, it creeps me out," or whatever, and we didn't go. And I said, you know, what an opportunity. But he told us, and he took us into the power plant. Do you remember, Elsa? And he said he wanted to keep that because Jerry Walcott himself, who I think probably is now ceded some of the responsibility to his two sons, but he said he was a big patron of the arts, and that he would like to keep that as a gallery space, and then the power station, and then the other buildings, and I think some of them are the greenhouse buildings and the laundry,
The laundry was the one on the right, closest to the power plant.
and greenhouse?
The greenhouse was, but they took the greenhouses
Oh,
down.
did they?
The greenhouse was, this part of it's still there, but it took this part
Oh, all
down.
right, well, anyway, there's the two rows of brick buildings.
This is the
that one
kitchen.
And the other. And he said he wanted to convert that into studio space or apartment space for starving artists that
Right.
he would really give a cut rate rent to. And the other thing that he liked, he said, was the water tower, and he said he would always keep that because he liked the architecture of it, and he liked, you know, just the style of it. And it is a very pretty building if you know, when you pass
Oh,
by.
yeah.
But the other thing, and I also remember because we did go in some of those houses where
And
the
he tore all
doctors
those down, I
lived
couldn't
in.
believe it.
He had said at that time that he was going to keep them and renovate them, and it was beautiful because the buildings themselves were not in good repair, the houses, but there was a colonnade of beautiful trees. They might have been oak trees or something. And I remember walking through it with you and going into one or two of the houses, which were really shells of a structure, and thinking to myself, wow, that would be really cool if you could keep them. And to hear that they're torn down is just, you know.
Sure. Now with CI, they're still there, the doctor's houses. They were
Right.
renovated and they were
Not all of
sold.
them, though, not all of them.
Yeah, but the ones on the main road there
On the
were,
main road.
you know? And when I saw him tearing those down, all right, that big building, I can, not that I agree, but more understandable than the smaller house.
Well, that was like something out of Gone with the Wind.
Right, right.
And he
then-
tore down the
and then
director's house too.
In the back, there was, more, like, almost prefab houses.
Oh, those are community residences.
Oh,
Yes.
all right.
Those are newer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which house was the director's house?
That one.
This one.
And that house was used for a lot longer than the rest of them were. So that one was in better shape. So I'm surprised that one was torn down, you know?
And that was a dormitory?
Yeah, that was professional staff, nurses, social workers, that kind of thing. The reason the ward staff was in the buildings in here is because they felt if emergencies, the staff is right there. Because that's, no matter who works for the state, the people that work on the wards, the grade 9 therapy aides, you can't run the place without them. I mean, they're the ones that are with the clients 24 hours a day, so that's why they're the closest.
Are the tunnels still under these two areas? Or
The tunnels are there, but what they did was, when they tore, like, for instance, we still own this building, which we used for rehab, we just closed it recently, and these two drug alcohol centers. So the tunnels still go under there, but where the buildings are torn down, like these two buildings are torn down, so the rubble is in the tunnel.
Right.
It's like if I walk underground, I can walk to where the rubble is. What we had to do was put brick walls up wherever we tore buildings down, because people were moving the rubble and going into the, they actually came into this building. They came in through the rubble. See, when you're in the tunnel, you could just walk into a building, because the door opens from, you know,
So there's
when you're
no
in the tunnel.
security.
So they came inside this building and stole a bunch of stuff from here. So now we got locks on the tunnel side, so they can't get through. Now, those photographs all the way around is a lot of the photographs when they're building the facility. Now, if you look at this one, I find interesting. Why, like, they always talk about all the staff lived here. It's obvious why. This is Pilgrim in 1938. There's nothing, just farmland. It's interesting how demographics change. Kings Park opened up late 1800s. Most of the staff was Irish. When I got a job there, I was in shock, because a lot of the people even spoke with an Irish accent still. Because they actually recruited people from Ireland to come here to work, because no one wanted to work here for some reason. I guess because there was no bridges or nothing. Once you're here, you're stuck here. But it's amazing how almost all the staff at Kings Park was Irish. Originally, Pilgrim was Irish also. Then later on, African Americans started moving up from the south. You had a large African American population here and a large Hispanic population here. And as a matter of fact, the Spanish population is still the biggest here, isn't it? And a lot of the towns were developed by the hospitals. Matter of fact, Kings Park was St. John branch of Kings County in the city. And that's how it got its name. Later on, when it first opened, it wasn't a state. See, Pilgrim was always a state facility. Kings Park and CI were not. They were county-run, and like I said, part of St. John, which it wasn't even a borough at the time, you know, in Kings County, New York. This picture shows you the two Comac roads. This is when Edgewood was already imploded, except for these two buildings. Now, this was Comac Road, which is still there. Okay, I went through here recently. This road is still, you can walk it. They moved Comac Road out here and used the old Comac Road to get from one facility to the other. And in here also, because like I said, during World War II, the Army used that building in Edgewood. In here, I guess it's, let me see. Here's the road coming out. All in here, like you see there's like baseball and like handball courts and all this stuff. All that's still in there. It's all like a woods now, but we walk through there and there's a road still through there and all that stuff is still in there. I found it amazing. Even the grandstands is still in there, everything. And that was mainly used by the soldiers when it was used by the military. Pilgrim, when it was being developed, the plan was it was going to be the world's largest hospital. And the plan originally was this is what it was going to be, everything except for the 80s, of course. That came later. Where Kings Park and CI were sporadically built. Like if you go there, the architecture is very different. Because they started building buildings in the 1800s, then they built a few more, then the government came in, they built some of the buildings. Matter of fact, the big building over there, 93, the real tall one, that was built by the federal government and turned over to the state because it was sinking. They noticed it was sinking right after it was built. So they gave it to the state. So that's why when you go over there, everything's so different looking. When you come here, everything looks the same. Because this was planned as a big hospital, they were not. This had 13,500 patients. I use that number simply because there's figures all over the place. And the only one I could find a lot of is 13,500. I've seen 16,000, 17,000, 12,000, but the 13,005 seems to be the most used term. There's the Brentwood. Brentwood had a marching band They're marching the parades with all the other fire department, police department, and that's the banner they used, and some of the equipment. A big one over there. These things with dictaphones, early dictaphones on a scroll, doctor would talk on. Mhm. This thing is a surgical table. This is impressive, you know. Here's what people don't realize. This, all right, this is Central Islip, not Pilgrim. You see these photographs? The reason I can show these is because you can't identify the people in them. Because normally I would not be able to show a picture of a client, and I can't. But you can't tell me who the employee is and who the client is the whole idea. So when you see those old movies where they're in pajamas, with slippers on, all locked up, well, these are patients and employees in all these photographs. And you tell me who the staff is and who the patient is.
I remember though, when I was little, the patients in CI had, it seemed to, or at least to me, had more freedom to walk around the town because they were close to the town. And I can remember as a little girl going to different stores with my mother and knowing, just knowing that they were a patient as opposed to somebody who was not.
It depends a lot on the type of client and the severity of the illness. A lot of them you cannot, just like now, if I took you onto one of our units now, and I didn't say who was who, a lot of them you're not going to know who the patient is and who the staff is.
Doesn't the staff wear a uniform?
No.
No?
Staff hasn't worn uniforms in,
Oh, I know. Years ago
God,
they did.
probably the 60s, 50s. I don't even remember, to be honest with you. I never saw it. I never saw a uniform.
Now, do you work here or are you a patient now?
We had a couple of famous patients. One of them was William H. Johnson. Those are copies of his artwork. He was a patient at Central Islip. He traveled the world. All his artwork now is in the Smithsonian. It's worth millions of dollars. He got, what? Yeah. He got syphilis. Syphilis causes brain damage, ended up as a patient in Central Islip. The reason I can talk about him and give you his name is because he's public. Stanley made him public. He's buried at the Pilgrim Potter's Field, and from what I'm gathering, I got a few phone calls from out-of-state museums who are in contact with his family that want to have his body removed. But like I said, all his work's worth millions, and when he got syphilis, it caused all that brain damage, and he ended up in his patient in the hospital. The other one was Percy Crosby. He's anybody older might have heard of the character Skippy. He was rich. His cartoon character was Skippy. He had lots of money. His family had him committed to Kings Park. He was in Building 93 at Kings Park. He spent the rest of his life there and died there. When I saw his, I didn't know anything about him. Albany called me about him when I was still a kid. And I was able to obtain his record. In his record, he actually drew pictures while he was a patient at Kings Park. And I saw them in his record. So I wanted to get the chart out, put it in the museum. And by the time I did all the paperwork I had to do and the phone calls and everything else, and was agreed that I could get a hold of that record, well, the photographs in the record, they turned it into microfilms. When I got it, it was copies. They destroyed it. Oh. State, the way state does things. That kind of annoyed me. You know. But CI had its own, each hospital had their own little thing. CI had its own golf course. Kings Park, on the other hand, excuse me?
Still there.
Yeah.
Still there, yes. Kings Park had its own boat docks and was right on the water. I felt, well, maybe because I worked there, but I always felt Kings Park was the prettiest of the facilities. I'll show you that room. This is copper. Yeah, these are the vents that were on top of the buildings like this one. These were taken off years ago. Those are the gauges off the turbines that were in the power plant here at Pilgrim. Danny Stoffel, who was the plant superintendent at the time, built that sign, had all lights behind it, if there was a problem, so they could fix it. Scales like this, we had hundreds of them all over the facilities. All these scales had huge platforms under them, because everything came in bulk and it was all weighed. Could have been grain, it could have been cattle, it could have been anything, and everything was weighed with these huge scales. Over here, very good key machine. When they started using regular keys, they still had skeleton keys. This machine can cut a skeleton key plus a regular key. They still make these blanks, but they cut them by hand. So I've had all kinds of offers to sell this machine, as crazy as that sounds, because they're very desirable. These were the power supplies in all these buildings. This came out of this building in 2000, so they were still using this up to 2000, 14 years ago. And these are 600 amp fuses. And generally speaking, they were very simple and they worked very well though. Now it's all electrical in the basement, very complicated. Back then it was very simple. If this fuse blew, what would happen is it would burn through this rod. This is 600 amps. That'll fry you to a crisp. They would just change this rod and reuse these. And when they connect these, they open it and then they pull these out and connect it. The power surge is amazing. Like, you don't have 600 amps in your house. It's unbelievable. I changed one once, I know. It's just incredible, the voltage and the amperage on it. These are the old fire boxes, the original ones. It's interesting, you had to have a key to open it. And then once you open it, you would pull this. And that would send
5 rounds of signal.
Right, that would send a signal to the firehouse, I guess.
Yeah.
So to let them know where the fire was. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I've had this a long time. Joe's the one that found a key to fit it. The gauges are interesting. The power plant is by far, to me, the nicest building on this property here. Power plant. You ever see the back of the power plant?
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. I mean, if you haven't gone back there, you should drive past there. It's beautiful. Over here, just to give you an indication of how big these facilities were, when they made soup, this is what they stirred it with. I'm not kidding. Everything was bulk. They had thousands of people here, and when they made soup like that, they had vats this big, and they'd be about that high. And they'd actually be on a step stool standing up there, mixing it. And the food they had back then was outstanding because everything was fresh. They slaughtered their own cattle, they grew their own crops, they had their own chickens, they had their own cows. These places were self-sufficient as far as in most aspects. And everything was done here. And the food was fantastic. Patients always loved the food. The food got bad once we started using, like what they use in hospitals, cook chill we use now, which is similar to what you would find in a general hospital or something like that. Before that, they made tons of food. Clients could have first, seconds, and thirds. We also had people getting heavy, but the food was outstanding. And what else? Just some of the machinery. Most of the big drills, like this drill press, are ran by a steam engine with a belt. They were on the walls of the maintenance department on the grounds here. CI actually had an army tank that when we were done, you used it on the farm, and when we were done using it, we dug a hole and buried it. Years later, I guess it was about 10 years ago now, a tank museum came here looking for that tank. We told them where it was buried. They dug it up, and there's photographs of them digging it up, and restored it. It's in a museum today. And when we buried that, to make sure nobody got in it, we filled it with dirt. So not only did they have to dig it up, the whole thing was filled to the top with dirt. But it was still in very good condition, even after all those years underground. Even at Pilgrim here, there was an army truck that had like hardly no mileage at all. That must have been donated here, but it had no roof on. It was an open truck. So they had it in the building back there all those years. So when they sold off the property, they pulled this truck out. It was like brand new. I wanted it for the museum out front, but they said people would be climbing on it, so I couldn't keep it. But I thought that was interesting. The fire department was also the police department, if you were both. No major fires. There was fires at Pilgrim, but no major fire. The major fires were at Kings Park. And when there was a big fire at Kings Park, all our fire departments only get 2 small trucks. So when a big fire happened, we had every fire department on Long Island there trying to put it out. Especially, even like the 3-story building at Kings Park, the one behind Macy Home went on fire. They had like 5 different fire departments there trying to put that out. These were the old benches from Pilgrim. Throughout the ground, these cement blocks on the floor, there was wood over them, there were the benches all over the facility back then. That was inside the power plant here.
I wasn't getting up.
Those are the radios they use. That's just some of the accidents that happened on the grounds here with car. I just like some of the cars and put them up.
Were there
Bus, the
any
Mustang.
famous people here?
At Pilgrim, they told me about one recently. I can't remember the name. They're trying to find information on it now for me, so I can't say for sure yet. There was somebody here, but I can't even remember the name. Someone called me up and told me about it, and they're checking into it for me now.
Because when I was a kid, they always frightened us that way. That the guy was in the Pilgrim, don't go on the grounds. You know, you could escape.
Oh, no, that's just people trying to scare you.
That's what I just said.
Yeah.
It was scaring the heck out of me.
So the roofs were slate, and they took the slate off, and what did they have?
They were clay.
Clay.
They took them all off, and they got rid of them. I don't know where they probably used them on rich people's houses, because they were nice.
Yeah.
But they're very heavy. There's a couple of sections of it in the other room, and you're like, man, can you imagine a whole roof full of those things? You're talking some major weight, you know?
What is it made of now, the roof?
They're like aluminum,
Okay.
you know. It's lighter, much lighter, it lasts a long time, it's easy to take care of. The problem we had in a lot of the Kings Park buildings, so Kings Park had a lot of flat roof buildings, so we always had problems with roofs caving in, things like that. Pilgrim, a lot of the roofs are the peak roofs,
What
much
was the
better.
maximum population?
The maximum was under 10,000 here. Or 10,500?
13,000.
No. He's talking about the max there was supposedly 11,000 or 10,000. There was 13,500, but the capability was like 10,000. There was more than the capability.
So there was 13,500.
Right, but the capability was like 10, 10.5, something
It
like
says
that.
10,300 in the other.
Yeah,
And what was the workforce? You know?
okay. There's always numbers like, they'll always sit there and tell us there's 1.5 staff members for every client, or sometimes 2.5, but that includes the guys who mow the lawn, the guys who cook the food, the power plant, fire department, you name it. But supposedly, going by the numbers they gave, there was more staff than patients. So if there was 13,500, what I can't understand is, where'd they put all these people? You know, that's my argument always was. You're talking a large number of people, like, where were they living?
Well, probably in the community somewhere.
There wasn't much of a community is the problem at the time. Like, when Kings Park opened, everybody lived at Kings Park, because there was nothing else around. The community built up later around the facility, but people worked at the facility and then moved into the community, built the community around the facility. Like Kings Park, that town is there because of the facility. Same with Brentwood.
Yeah, but there were a lot of people from Bayshore. I remember Mary Reed saying that when she worked here, Fifth Avenue was a dirt road. And they lived in Bayshore, down by Bayshore High School.
Okay.
Family. So a number of people lived in Bayshore, but worked at Pilgrim. And, you know, so they did not live on the grounds.
What year was that over?
Would have been the 50s, late 50s.
So I'm talking more like, in Kings Park opened up in the late 1800s,
Yeah.
Brentwood opened up in 31. So during those years, there wasn't much here.
No.
So like I don't even know when the population was at its peak. I'm assuming it was later, like 60s.
The 60s.
When
50s, 60s.
When Drummond opened up and they hired 20,000, 30,000 people, that's when Kings Park got projects there, and Brentwood got a lot of houses because all the facilities in the 50s, like I worked for Fairchild, Drummond,
Okay.
all those, they built these houses out here to accommodate those people.
What I find interesting is, when I worked at Kings Park, I had a lot of friends who lived in Brentwood, and they're all gone. There's nobody. Like, you know, it's like everything completely changed. There's nobody. I just find it interesting where Kings Park, on the other hand, like, they're still there. You know, when I started working there as a kid, you go back there 45 years later, those same old people are still there, or their children are still there. Where Brentwood, it's like everything kept changing through the years.
Well, in the late 30s and early 40s, there were boarding houses on Crooked Hill Road. Because I did a lot of research of people who went to war,
Yeah.
and their addresses are boarding houses along Crooked Hill Road. And their occupation was working at Pilgrim.
No, interesting. You know, it's funny too, when I lived in, like I said, when I worked at Kings Park, I actually had a room on the ground at Kings Park for a time. And I made friends with some guy, Eric, who lived in Brentwood. And his family worked at Pilgrim. And it's like, so I go over there and visit him at his house. It was on, what's the road over there?
Washington?
Crooked Hill.
Not Crooked Hill Road. Comac Road on this side, what's the opposite side?
Crooked Hill?
That's Crooked Hill. They live down by the shopping center.
Yeah.
On Crooked Hill Road. And that was my first introduction to a large Hispanic population, because all the people in there were Hispanics, you know? And I'm Italian. It was just like funny, because a lot of the things they did were very similar to Italians. But it was my first culture with somebody different than myself, when I made friends with Eric and came to Brentwood. You know, it's just interesting. And then even when I went to Kings Park, everybody was Irish. I actually felt out of place. Everybody was Irish. I never saw anything like it in my life.
And we succeeded. We got rid of all the Irish.
Yeah.
No, you didn't.
And then when I lived in the city, I lived in the Bronx, off Tremont Avenue, and it was all Jewish. Everybody was Jewish. You know? It's just odd how, through my life, the way we moved, I always, a completely different culture, lifestyles. It's just amazing, I think, you know? So I saw a lot. But I still like Kings Park the best. I always like the grounds.
It is.
Beautiful place. Brentwood, initially when I first came here, I didn't want to come here like anybody else. You used to the place you are. But once I got here, it was fine, like any other thing. You know.
What was this building used for?
These were, all the buildings like this were staff housing. You had a room, this would have been, everything was opened up, this would have been the door to your room, and your room would be from here to that window. Now think about it. See these 3 windows? That was 3 apartments.
Oh, that's like the convent.
Yeah, that was it. You had like, between that pipe and that other small pipe, that was your room. And you shared the bathroom. And at the end of the building, like down there, it's still open. It was like a little open area for you to hang out if you didn't want to stay in your little room. And throughout all these facilities, it was just like that. They were very small. What I mainly used it for was back then, you had to work overtime all the time. Mandatory, all the time. And I lived out east, and to work 16 hours, get home, I get 5 hours, so you have to come back. So I got one, the rooms were cheap, so I got myself a room, it was only $70 a month. So at least when I had to work overtime, I just stayed on the grounds. So I got a full night's sleep that way.
That must have been nice.
It was easy, you know.
Good eating.
Yeah. When I was here, they didn't really have that. Early on, they did. They had the staff dining room was down by maintenance. It was next to the laundry. That was the staff dining room. But that was way before my time. The assembly hall that's on the grounds here, still there. It's right over there. Now, maintenance used it now, and they built a structure on the floor of the gym. But that can be taken out. That building is still completely intact. If you climb above it, the stage is still there, the lights are still
We
there.
performed on that stage. The evening high
Neat.
school drama workshop
Neat.
used
Yeah.
to do their dress rehearsal at Pilgrim.
Neat.
When I
And
was in
it's,
for the-
elementary
for the
school, they
clients.
took the ballet class.
Yeah.
Ivy Ramsey was her name.
Oh, Ivy Rosenthal?
She was my
Yeah.
ballet teacher, took us
Yeah,
to perform
and we
for
did
the
a,
patients.
yeah, for the clients, and we were performing, and some of them walked up on the stage and joined us.
Oh,
And,
that's
you know, it
neat.
was kind of interesting.
I know.
it's neat when you walk in there because there's these balconies where the movie cameras are on top. because they had a movie theater in there too. And when you look down, it's like going back in time, because everything is still there. So you walk in the building now, you think you're walking to something new, because there's all these nice little hallways and offices. But that's just built on the gym floor. That could just be taken out. Everything else is still there.
This has been,
Unbelievable.
thank you. This is,
Quite all right.
have we done it again?
And get Heartland to do something.
You don't by chance have a card, do you?
No, I never really had one.
Yeah.
But if you need to get a hold of me, I'll give you a number.
Well, Peter's, they got the number.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
Right, you've got the contact information. Just so we can send you a thank you.
Oh, that's
you
quite all
know,
right. I can do anything.
Yeah, we went to.
We're classy, we do that.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, we are classy, we like to.
The shame they have here, though, is I have another room with other stuff in it, but they consider it sensitive because of whatever reason, and it's such a shame. Like, I can't show it, because a lot of it because of PHI regulations, but the stuff's over 100 years old. And it's a
There's no statute
shame.
of limitations on it?
Not with any of that, no.
Do you have,
I can only show it to people who work here.
do you have the ability to make changes in these rooms?
Of course.
You do.
Yeah, I can do whatever I want. And so could he. Yeah.
What kind of stuff is it? Just an overview?
I mean, I have thousands of photographs that were taken here, but they have photographers of this facility through the years, from when it opened all the way up until like 1970. And some of the stuff is outstanding. I have,
It's that sensitive, but why would that?
because like it has pictures, in some of the pictures would be some from patients, even though some of those pictures were taken in 1932, I get out, obviously, you know, I mean, I still can't show it. There's also other things, there's more in there. Because the difference with those is, they're very small, you can identify, you can't make out a face in them. And also, it's a room full of people like this where you can't make out a face, and half of those people are staff members. So you don't know who the patient is. In these photographs, I got pictures on the units, what it was like living here throughout the whole time this place was open, and more better stuff than that. Yeah, but it's all considered sensitive. I can only show it to people who work here.
Okay, cool book.
They worked in the bakery, the shoe shop, the farms, the maintenance department, housekeeping. No, later they were. Initially, the state felt, you're living here, you should contribute. Didn't have to, but you should. So if you wanted to contribute, you can work throughout the facility. And a lot of them did. Later on, that was stopped because they said if they're working, they should be getting paid. So what they did later on is we started work programs. That's where I came in when I got into rehab. And we started paying them a salary. Did away with that because they said that is, it's good, work is good for people, but you're not giving them incentive to get out. Because you can't win. They're living here, now they're making decent salaries, working here. Exactly, so why leave? So that's what ended up killing that.
No, I saw at the store, you had those little coupons.
That was a time frame.
Did they have like money like in a, you know, like?
No, we gave clients money.
Okay. Did the
But-
families leave like money for them to use?
I mean, sometimes it did. Most of the money that the clients got came from the state. And all the clients got a certain amount of money, okay? What we did for a while was, when we started having a lot of escapes, because you could cash, they would use the cash to buy. So we started giving them store cards. So they would go to the stores on the grounds and shop. Later on, we started, they could always go out on the grounds. The clients would never, I mean, since Pilgrim opened, right after it was open, everybody had on the cards. 90% of the patients were walking around the grounds. They weren't locked in buildings, but they had to stay on the grounds. Later on, we did away with the store cards, and a lot of our clients could even leave the grounds and go into town. So that's why
What
that.
about the cemetery?
What about it? Heartland owns it.
They own it now?
He's responsible for it. That was part of the deal when he bought the property.
Is it still an open cemetery or?
I mean, I guess, and I drove back there and when I just went in there, it's like, There's no gates or nothing.
Well,
But-
half of it's paved over for the parking lot.
No, he couldn't
No,
touch
not
the
the
cemetery.
cemetery.
He couldn't,
That's what, no, that predates him owning it, and that's what he told Elsa. Don't you remember Elsa? That some of the graves are actually underneath the park and ride. We got
You know-
that from Jerry Washington.
On
You know-
the park and ride by the expressway.
Yeah.
okay, because that's right behind
That
it.
could be.
But you know something funny though? Never take anything 100% because for years I was told that the Kings Park football field was built on top of the old cemetery. Because there was a new cemetery and they said it was an old cemetery. And I found out recently with someone who's really old, he's pretty much dying, and he's going, now, the old cemetery's right down the block. It was never, like, you know, so all the years I worked there, I thought the cemetery was under the football field and it wasn't. So you don't know for sure when it comes to that.
Could be with.
I mean, if anything's possible,
Yeah, yeah.
but you don't really know.
That's why he said he'll always, he'll always take special care of that. Do you remember him saying that? Because we got out and we walked around a little bit there too.
I personally think the state should have kept it themselves and be responsible.
But that was part of it,
Well, I know, but I think it's kind of ridiculous, my opinion.
Yeah.
The state probably didn't want to maintain it.
Oh, yeah, but I still think it's kind of, you know, oh, if you want to buy this property, take that and take care of it, give me a break. You're the one who made this, take care of it.
I think that they were segregated by religion. I think that there were 3 separate areas.
Yeah, there's, they redid the, what is that, the Hebrew? Where did they redo the Jewish? That was CI. Yeah, the rabbis and stuff got donations and renovated the Jewish section, but now they're gonna do the whole cemetery, from what I understand. In CI, but I think that might happen here too, you know. Some people took interest in the CI one, and some were renovated, other ones were renovated, they put a gate up. But they say they're going to, that's next. I heard some talk to do the same thing here.
All right, we gotta.
Okay.
Okay.
Go.
And I'll let you know.